They killed her entire team. 9 SEALs gone in under 5 minutes, no backup, no air support, and no one left but her, wounded, bleeding, alone. So they started hunting her, tracking her blood, mocking her name, bragging about what they'd do if they caught her alive. But the one woman they couldn't find wasn't running. She was drawing them in. Before we show you exactly how she turned their manhunt into a massacre, make sure you're subscribed with the bell turned on and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. Because this story didn't end in retreat. It ended with a reminder: Navy SEALs don't run. She didn't see the first explosion coming. Nobody ever does. 1 second, she was scanning the narrow Balkan ravine through her night vision, counting shadows and cataloging the kind of silence that meant either safety or death. The next second, the mountains themselves seemed to crack open and spit fire. The shockwave hit like a freight train made of sound and heat. Gravel jumped off the ground and slapped her face. Her teeth rattled. The taste of copper and cordite flooded her mouth before she even realized what was happening. Then came the screaming. Contact front, IED, IED, break formation! Lieutenant Commander Kara Dwyer dropped behind a boulder that hadn't been there a heartbeat before, thrown clear by the blast, and brought her weapon up even as her ears rang like church bells in a hurricane. The world had turned red and white and the color of things that shouldn't be burning. Behind her, Petty Officer Walsh was calling for a medic in a voice that said he wouldn't need one much longer. That's when the second blast hit. Closer this time, much closer. The overpressure knocked her sideways into a tangle of broken pine branches. Something wet and warm splattered across her face. She didn't want to know what. Through the smoke and chaos, she could see muzzle flashes winking like deadly stars from positions that hadn't been there during their daylight recon. They'd walked into a slaughter that had been planned, prepared, and perfectly executed. 10 minutes earlier, SEAL Team Griffin had been moving through what the intelligence boys called permissive terrain, just another patrol back to their forward operating base after what should have been a routine check on weapons cache reports near the Montenegro border. 9 operators total, good spacing, clean comms, terrain that looked like every other piece of Balkan wilderness they'd humped through over the past 3 weeks. LT, you think Command's ever gonna let us actually find something on these wild goose chases? Petty Officer Rodriguez had whispered over comms, his voice carrying the kind of dry humor that came from 3 deployments and a healthy skepticism about intelligence reports. Keep dreaming, Rodriguez, she'd replied, but stay sharp. Something about this whole sector feels wrong. She'd been right to trust that instinct. The weapons cache they'd been sent to investigate didn't exist, but the ambush waiting for them was very real. Too clean, as it turned out. Too perfectly orchestrated. Now voices were shouting in accented English over the sound of belt-fed machine guns chewing through everything in sight. Professional voices, calm voices, the kind that belonged to men who'd done this before and expected to do it again. Sector 4 clear. Move to finish them. Check bodies, no survivors. Find the woman. Orders are specific. Kara pressed herself deeper into the rocks and fought the urge to key her radio. Any transmission now would give away her position to people who clearly had more firepower, better terrain, and a plan that was working exactly as intended. Instead, she listened to her team die. Walsh stopped calling for help. Jenkins never finished his sentence about flanking movements. Rodriguez, who'd been joking about wild goose chases just minutes before, made a sound like air escaping from a punctured tire, then nothing at all. One by one, the voices on her squad net went quiet until all she could hear was her own breathing and the sound of boots moving with methodical precision through the kill zone. And in the silence that followed, she heard something that made her blood freeze. English. American English. Tango down. Sector 3. Copy. Continue sweep pattern. Anyone got eyes on the primary target? Primary target. They weren't just hunting Americans. They were hunting her specifically. And in the silence that followed, she heard boots moving with the methodical patience of men who were being paid to make sure. They weren't checking for survivors. They were confirming kills. A boot crunched on gravel maybe 10 feet away, then another. She could hear them talking in low voices, professional and relaxed, like mechanics discussing the best way to disassemble an engine. This one's got a special operations patch. Take a photo. Command will want proof. Where's the female? Still looking. She's wounded. There's blood over here. Through a gap in the rocks, Kara could see a figure in dark clothing methodically going through her teammates' gear. No rush, no panic, just business. She watched him pull out Rodriguez's encrypted radio and speak into it with the casual confidence of someone following a rehearsed plan. Primary target not among the confirmed kills. Initiating Phase 2 protocols. The response crackled back immediately. Copy. Remember, she has intelligence on the Sarajevo operation. That information cannot reach Washington. Sarajevo operation. The arms trafficking network her team had been tracking for the past month. The one that had connections reaching into NATO command structure. The one that several very powerful people had every reason to keep buried. Now she understood why the ambush had been so precisely executed, why they'd known exactly when and where to hit her team, why American voices were coordinating the slaughter of American operators. This wasn't random violence. This was damage control. That's when she understood. This wasn't a random ambush. This wasn't militia with lucky timing and improvised explosives. This was a professional hit, and she was the primary target. Kara waited until the boots moved away, then began the most important movement of her life. A slow, silent crawl through the rubble toward what looked like a drainage gully carved into the hillside by decades of mountain runoff. Every inch was earned in pain. Shrapnel had found her left leg, carving a groove through muscle that felt like someone was drawing lines with a blowtorch. Her shoulder hung wrong, dislocated, or worse, something was definitely broken in her chest, making each breath feel like swallowing broken glass. But she was breathing, and breathing meant she could still think, and thinking meant she could still fight. She made it to the gully just as voices started getting closer again. Blood trail leads this way. She's moving downhill, probably trying to reach the extraction point. Doesn't matter, we've got all night, and she's bleeding. Kara pressed her face into mud that smelled like old leaves and older rain, and listened to them plan her death with the same tone men might use to discuss weekend fishing trips. They thought she was running. That was their first mistake. She wasn't running. She was drawing. Her father had taught her that lesson when she was 12 years old during one of their weekend hunting trips in the mountains outside Pendleton. They'd been tracking a wounded buck when it suddenly turned and charged. Not because it was desperate, but because it had led them exactly where it wanted them. Sometimes, he'd said afterward, cleaning his rifle on the tailgate of his old Ford, the best defense isn't running away. It's making them think you're running while you're actually choosing the ground. Now, 20 years later, and bleeding into foreign soil, she finally understood what he'd meant. The gully led downhill through terrain that looked like God's own obstacle course. Broken shale, dense pine cover, narrow defiles that force single-file movement. Perfect country for making people disappear. She reached into her medkit and pulled out combat gauze, stuffing it into the leg wound without ceremony. No anesthetic, no gentle pressure, just military-grade medical intervention that hurt almost as much as the original injury. Then she started leaving a trail. Not accidentally, deliberately. A smear of blood on a tree trunk here, a boot print in soft earth there, the kind of sign that said, wounded animal moving through. But each mark was placed with careful thought. Each drop of blood was an invitation to follow a specific path, a path that led uphill toward terrain that got narrower and more technical with every step. Behind her, she could hear them organizing, grid search patterns, bounding overwatch, radio check-ins every 5 minutes, professional work. But they were building their tactics around one fundamental assumption, that she was trying to escape. That assumption was going to kill them. The first phase of her plan required patience and pain in roughly equal measure. Kara climbed, not fast, not direct. She followed the kind of route a wounded person might take. Choosing easier ground over tactical advantage, avoiding steep sections that would require both hands, sticking to paths that offered the illusion of cover without actually providing much concealment. She left just enough sign to keep them interested, A torn piece of medical tape caught on a branch, boot prints in a muddy section that couldn't be avoided, blood drops that were carefully rationed to suggest ongoing injury without indicating how serious it really was. Every quarter mile, she stopped and listened. They were following. Trail's clear here. She's staying low, following the drainage. Wounds slowing her down. We'll have her before dawn. Remember the orders. Alive if possible. Pieces if necessary. They actually laughed at that last part. Kara kept climbing. The terrain was doing exactly what she'd hoped, funneling them into predictable routes, forcing them to move in single file through sections where the path was barely wide enough for one person, places where small advantages could become decisive ones, places where someone with patience and preparation could turn a pursuit into something else entirely. She reached the spot she'd been looking for just as the sky started showing the first gray hints of dawn. A narrow ledge that overlooked the path below, with good fields of fire and multiple escape routes. More importantly, it was a place where someone being pursued might logically stop to make a stand. From their perspective, it would look like desperation. From hers, it was pure calculation. She opened the pack she'd taken from Petty Officer Martinez before leaving the kill zone, the one that contained his Claymore mine and enough det cord to reshape the local geography. Time to start teaching her pursuers the difference between hunting and being hunted. The Claymore went into position with the kind of precision that came from doing something so many times, it became muscle memory. Angle of placement calculated for maximum effect. Trigger wire concealed, but accessible. Kill zone clearly defined and marked in her mind. She checked her rifle, suppressed M4 with enough ammunition for a sustained engagement if things went badly. Her sidearm was secure and ready. Medical supplies were consolidated and easily accessible. Everything was exactly where it needed to be. Below, she could hear them getting closer. Blood stops here. She must have bandaged up. Path continues upward, still following the easiest route. Stay alert. Wounded doesn't mean harmless. Too little, too late. The first figure appeared on the path below, moving with tactical precision, but also with the confidence of someone who believed they were chasing prey instead of walking into a predator's lair. Kara let him pass the trigger point. Then the second man came into view. She waited until both targets were in the optimal kill zone. Then she squeezed. The Claymore detonated with the kind of sound that made the mountains echo. 700 steel balls moving at 4,000 feet per second turned the narrow path into a meat grinder. When the smoke cleared, there wasn't enough left of either man to require confirmation. Behind them, voices erupted in controlled panic. Contact! Contact! 2 down! She's got heavy weapons! Where's the firing position? Kara was already moving, not running, relocating. She slipped laterally through the tree line to a position 50 meters away, where she had clear sight lines to the path and multiple routes for withdrawal if necessary. The third man appeared, advancing with much more caution now. He was scanning continuously, weapon ready, every movement suggesting professional training and recent combat experience. Unfortunately for him, Kara had more of both. Her first shot took him center mass. Her second shot, fired while he was falling, ensured he wouldn't need medical attention. The fourth man learned from his predecessor's mistake. Instead of advancing up the path, he tried to flank through the tree line. It was a good tactical decision that might have worked against someone with less experience. But Kara had been expecting it. She'd already repositioned to cover the flank, and when he appeared through the pines, she was waiting. One shot, no drama. Professional work. The radio she'd taken from the kill zone crackled with increasingly desperate transmissions. 4 down! Repeat, 4 down! She's not running. She's hunting us. Request immediate extraction. The response came in a voice she didn't recognize. Accented but precise English, with the kind of authority that suggested someone used to being obeyed. Negative. Complete the mission. She's one person with limited ammunition and significant injuries. Finish this. The voice paused, then added something that made Kara's blood run cold. And remember, the client specifically requested proof of termination. Don't disappoint me. She keyed the captured radio and spoke for the first time since the ambush. This is Lieutenant Commander Kara Dwyer, United States Navy. Identify yourself. Silence, then laughter. Commander Dwyer, we've been looking forward to meeting you. My name is Viper, and I have some clients who've paid a considerable sum to see you die slowly. Sorry to disappoint your clients, she replied, but I'm not planning to die today. Oh, but you are. You see, we know exactly where you are. We know you're wounded, and we know you're running out of ammunition and options. Kara looked at her remaining magazines. He wasn't wrong about the ammunition. Here's what's going to happen, Viper continued. You're going to surrender. You're going to walk down that hill with your hands visible. And you're going to spend your last few hours answering questions about recent Navy operations in the Balkans. And if I refuse, then we'll take you piece by piece. Either way, you're not leaving this mountain alive. Kara clicked off the radio and checked her watch. Dawn was still an hour away. Extraction, if it was coming, wouldn't arrive until full daylight. She had to survive until then, against an unknown number of professionals who had her location, superior numbers, and apparently all the time in the world. But they'd made one critical error in their psychological assessment. They thought she was afraid. They thought the prospect of dying slowly would break her will to resist. What they didn't understand was that she'd stopped being afraid of death the day she earned her trident. And they definitely didn't understand that making someone angry was very different from making them afraid. The captured tablet became her window into their operation. She could see their positions, their movement patterns, even their communications protocols. More importantly, she could access their command frequency and listen to their coordination in real time. That's when she heard something that changed the entire game. Viper, this is Control. Washington is asking questions about the Griffin team. You need to wrap this up within the hour. Copy that. Target is wounded and contained. Moving to termination now. Negative. New orders. Make it look like she was captured and executed by local militia. We need plausible deniability. Understood. We'll stage it properly. They weren't just trying to kill her to protect their arms trafficking operation. They were planning to use her death as justification for expanded military operations in the region. Probably operations that would benefit the same people who were paying for tonight's slaughter. She keyed into their frequency and spoke in a voice like winter. Control, this is your target. I've been listening to your communications for the past hour. I know about the Sarajevo network. I know about the NATO insider providing intelligence, and I know you're planning to blame my death on local militia. Dead silence on the frequency. Then, that's impossible. She doesn't have access to... Check your tactical display, Control. See those red dots disappearing one by one? Those are your people. And they're not disappearing because they're moving to new positions. She was bluffing about some of it, but the psychological effect was exactly what she'd hoped for. Panic started creeping into their voices. How many has she actually killed? 7 confirmed, maybe more. This was supposed to be a simple cleanup operation. Sir, with respect, she's not fighting like someone who's trying to survive. She's fighting like someone who already knows she's dead and just wants to take as many of us with her as possible. That gave her an idea. Control, this is Target. I'm uploading something to your tactical network that you're going to find very interesting. She accessed the tablet's camera function and took a photograph of the intelligence documents she'd found in Rodriguez's pack, documents that detailed the full extent of the Sarajevo network, including names, bank accounts, and operational details. Then she uploaded it to their shared tactical server. That's a complete breakdown of your operation, she said calmly. Names, dates, financial transfers, everything. And I've just uploaded it to your own network, which means everyone with access now has it. Delete that immediately. Can't. Already propagated through your system. But here's the interesting part. I also sent a burst transmission to a very specific frequency before I keyed into your net, a frequency monitored by people in Washington who ask very pointed questions about dead Navy SEALs. The frequency went completely quiet for almost a full minute. When Viper's voice finally came back, it carried a different tone entirely. You're lying. You don't have that capability. Test me. Another pause. What do you want? I want you to come find me yourself. No backup, no support, just you and me. and we'll settle this the old-fashioned way. Why would I do that? Because if you don't, those documents go public. Your operation gets burned, your clients get exposed, and a lot of very powerful people are going to be very unhappy with someone named Viper. She could hear him thinking it over, weighing his options. Finally, where? Grid coordinates 774219. The old amphitheater. You know the place. I'll be there. Looking forward to it. And she was. Kara moved through the pre-dawn darkness like a ghost with a grudge. She wasn't trying to escape anymore. She wasn't trying to survive until rescue arrived. She was hunting. The terrain worked in her favor now. She knew it better than they did, having spent the last several hours studying every approach, every sight line, every piece of cover large enough to hide a body. They were working from maps and GPS coordinates. She was working from intimate knowledge earned in blood. She found the next group moving up the eastern slope in tactical formation. 3 men, properly spaced, good communication discipline, advancing with the kind of caution that suggested they'd learned from what happened to their teammates. But as she watched them through her scope, she noticed something that changed everything. The lead man was carrying a tablet computer, and every few minutes he'd stop to check it, coordinating with someone off-site. Real-time intelligence, satellite feeds, maybe even drone surveillance she couldn't detect. That's how they'd known her team's patrol route. That's how they'd set the perfect ambush. And that's how they were tracking her now. She needed that tablet. Which meant instead of killing them from a distance, she had to get close. Kara circled wide, using a dried creek bed to approach their position from the flank. The terrain was treacherous. Loose shale that wanted to slide with every step. Thorny brush that caught at her gear, and the constant risk of skyling herself against the ridgeline. But it also provided cover. She got within 20 meters before the lead man stopped and held up a closed fist. The team froze. He'd heard something. For 30 seconds, nobody moved. The only sound was wind through the pines and her own heartbeat hammering against her ribs. Then he relaxed and signaled the advance to continue. That's when Kara moved. The suppressed rifle coughed twice, center mass shots that dropped the rear guard before he could call out. The second man spun toward the sound, weapon coming up. But Kara was already rolling left behind a fallen log. The lead man with the tablet dove for cover behind a boulder, shouting into his radio, "Contact, contact, grid 774. Kara's third shot caught him in the shoulder, spinning him away from his radio but not killing him. Perfect. She needed him alive. For 5 minutes, they played a deadly game of hide-and-seek among the rocks. He'd pop up to take a shot. She'd force him back down. He'd try to move to better cover. She'd pin him in place with precise fire. Finally, she called out, "Drop your weapon and slide the tablet toward me, and you get to see another sunrise." "Go to hell." "Already been. Didn't like the company." Another pause. Then, "What do you want?" "Information." "Who's running the Sarajevo network? Who gave you my team's route?" Silence. "I can wait all day," she lied. Her leg was throbbing, her vision was starting to blur from blood loss, and she could hear more voices in the distance, but he didn't know that. "You're bleeding," he called out. "I can smell it. How long before you pass out?" "Long enough to put a bullet between your eyes if you don't start talking." She heard him muttering into his radio, probably calling for backup. Time to end this. Kara pulled a fragmentation grenade from her vest, her last one, and lobbed it behind his position. Not to kill, but to force movement. The explosion sent him scrambling from cover, and that's when she took the shot that put him down permanently. But she'd gotten what she needed. The tablet was intact, and when she powered it up, the screen showed a tactical display that made her stomach clench. Red dots scattered across the mountainside, at least 15 more hostiles converging on her position, flight paths for surveillance drones, and worst of all, her own location marked with a pulsing red X. They weren't just hunting her, they were hurting her. Kara had positioned herself on a rocky outcrop that overlooked their route, with det cord and the last of Martinez's explosives rigged to create a rock slide. Not subtle, but effective. She waited until all 3 were in the kill zone. The explosion brought down half the hillside. When the dust settled, there was nothing left but silence and a pile of rocks that hadn't been there 5 minutes earlier. The radio crackled. "Viper, we've lost contact with Team 2. How many has she killed?" "7 confirmed, maybe more." A longer pause this time. "This is impossible. She's one wounded operator with limited resources." "Sir, with respect, she's not fighting like someone who's trying to survive. She's fighting like someone who's already dead and just wants to take as many of us with her as possible." That was closer to the truth than they realized. Kara wasn't fighting to survive. She was fighting because her team was dead, because someone had paid money to murder Navy SEALs, and because letting that go unanswered wasn't something she could live with. The survival part was secondary. She keyed the radio. "Viper, this is Dwyer. How many more men do you want to lose before you admit this isn't working?" "You're bluffing. You can't have much ammunition left. Why don't you come find out?" Silence, then. "Very well. No more games. I'm coming for you personally." "Looking forward to it." And she was. Because personal meant close range. Personal meant individual combat instead of coordinated team tactics. Personal meant the kind of fighting where training and experience mattered more than numbers. Personal meant she had a chance. Kara found the perfect place for a final confrontation, a natural amphitheater formed by erosion and rockfall, with limited approaches and excellent acoustics. The kind of place where every sound carried and every movement was visible. The kind of place where psychological warfare could be just as effective as actual warfare. She positioned herself where she could see all the approaches, then began the process of making Viper come to her on her terms. First, she used the radio. "Viper, I'm waiting for you at grid coordinates 774219. Come alone if you want this to be quick. Bring friends if you want to watch them die first." No response, but she could hear movement in the valley below. Careful, professional, but also hesitant in a way that suggested her previous work had made an impression. Next, she started leaving specific signs. Not the random marks of someone fleeing, but deliberate messages, a few drops of blood arranged in a pattern that spelled out SEAL in military phonetic alphabet. Her dog tags hung from a tree branch where they'd catch the light. A combat knife stuck into a log with a note wrapped around the handle. The note said, "Your move." It took 20 minutes for Viper to reach the amphitheater. When he appeared, Kara could see why he'd been confident. He was big, professional gear, military bearing, the kind of presence that suggested extensive special operations experience in someone else's military. But he was also alone. "Commander Dwyer," he called out, "you've caused me considerable inconvenience." "Sorry about that," she replied from concealment. "Send me a bill." "Where are you?" "Close enough." He was scanning methodically, weapon ready, obviously familiar with this kind of tactical situation. But he was also talking, which meant he was either supremely confident or nervous enough to need the sound of his own voice. "You know this ends only one way," he said. "You're right," Kara replied. "The question is whether you're smart enough to figure out which way that is." She was moving as she spoke, using the acoustics of the space to make her voice seem to come from multiple directions. An old trick, but effective against someone who was already under stress. "I have backup coming," Viper said. "No, you don't." She was right. If he'd had backup available, he would have used it already, instead of losing 7 men to 1 wounded SEAL. "My clients will pay you triple what the Navy does. This doesn't have to end badly for both of us." "It's not going to end badly for both of us," Kara said. Then she stepped into view, 50 feet away. Rifle up, clear shot. "Just for you." Viper was fast. Professional reflexes, good tactical movement, years of training that showed in every response. He was just dealing with someone who was faster. Kara's first shot took him in the shoulder, spinning him around but not dropping him. Her second shot hit center mass, but his body armor absorbed most of the impact. His return fire was accurate and professional, forcing her to dive for cover behind a fallen log. They traded shots for several minutes. Careful, precise shooting that reflected mutual respect for each other's capabilities. But Kara had advantages he didn't. She knew the terrain better. She prepared the field, and most importantly, she wasn't trying to take a prisoner. When Viper moved to flank her position, she was ready. The improvised explosive device she'd rigged behind the large boulder detonated when he stepped on the pressure plate, throwing him 15 feet through the air and into a pile of sharp rocks. He was still alive when she reached him, but not by much. "Who hired you?" she asked. Blood bubbled at the corners of his mouth. "Doesn't matter. More will come. Let them." She keyed her emergency beacon and sent the signal she'd been saving for the end, a burst transmission that would bring extraction helicopters and a lot of very angry Navy SEALs who would be interested in asking questions about dead Americans. Viper tried to say something else, but the effort was too much. Kara sat down heavily beside him and checked her watch. Dawn was breaking over the mountains, painting everything gold and red. In the distance, she could hear helicopters. She'd survived the night. More importantly, she'd made sure that whoever had paid for this would understand that murdering Navy SEALs was expensive in ways they probably hadn't calculated. The extraction team found her an hour later, still sitting beside Viper's body, watching the sunrise and thinking about teammates who wouldn't see another one. They asked if she was all right. She told them she was fine. It wasn't entirely true. She'd need surgery on the leg, physical therapy for the shoulder, and probably some time to process what had happened on this mountain. But it was true enough. She was alive. The people who tried to kill her weren't, and sometimes that was the only kind of victory that mattered. Could you keep fighting when everything seemed hopeless the way Kara did? Would you have the courage to turn from hunted to hunter when the odds were against you? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story reminded you that the most dangerous thing you can do is corner someone who's already lost everything, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about warriors who refuse to quit. Share this with someone who needs to remember that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about deciding that something else matters more than fear. Your next mission is waiting. Same time tomorrow. I'll see you there.